We're here with Bob and Ben. I was thinking we should call you like the B&B show.
Yep. All right, we ready to go?
Not yet.
All right.
First we need the people.
Yeah, okay.
Takes a little while.
Yeah.
We got one, which is probably me. 6. All right, folks are joining us.
Okay.
With Bob Pickering with Flagler County Emergency Management Services. And we have Ben Nelson with the National Weather Service. All right, gentlemen, what do you have for us tonight?
Well, good evening, and welcome to the Weather Desk here at the Emergency Operations Center. And, of course, you folks see me out there all the time. But, again, as was pointed out, we have Ben Nelson. We're very fortunate to have him here from the National Weather Service in Jacksonville. He's been hanging out with us, helping us watch Tropical Cyclone Darian as it's approaching Flagler County and approaching our region. And it's not going to directly hit us, at least right now, but we're going to feel some impacts from this tropical cyclone. And we're going to start, very soon, we're going to start seeing some of those impacts in Flagler County. And I'm going to let Ben go ahead and take a look at the weather radar and kind of explain what we got going on here.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Bob. Good evening, everybody, from the Flagler County Emergency Operations Center. We're joining you at just the right time because we have the outer bands here. The far outer band of Hurricane Dorian is now pushing into Flagler County. We've had gusts up around 35 to at times 40 miles per hour within these heavy rain bands that are now pushing on shore. You'll look over here, the center or the eye of Dorian is starting to get a little bit better organized over the Gulf Stream waters, and it is moving slowly towards the northwest at 6 miles per hour, and you can see that outer band now making its way into Flagler County. So we're going to be in the waves of heavy showers overnight. Those sustained winds will begin to pick up as the night goes on. We're expecting sustained tropical storm force winds to begin along the Flagler coast sometime around midnight, perhaps an hour or two afterwards. And those will continue through a good portion of the day tomorrow, probably till the late afternoon, as Dorian's eye comes about 80 to 90 miles off our coast.
Okay, so if it starts around midnight, when will the worst of the storm hit the area?
Yeah, we're expecting the worst of the storm to be during the morning hours for the most part, at least in terms of the rain and the wind.
Like daylight, early morning?
Yeah, I think around right around sunrise, 6, 7 a.m.
Okay.
Through about the noon hour. And then once we get to the noon hour, the eye of Dorian is going to be bypassing us directly to the east. Our winds will shift around to the north, and then the northwest will get some drier air in here later in the day, but we will have periodic rain bands throughout the day and tropical storm force gusts into the late afternoon hours tomorrow. The worst of the storm, though, that we're going to receive hazard-wise are the large battering waves, the beach erosion, and also the storm surge. So the storm surge is going to be a little bit different depending on whether you're on the intercoastal waterway or on the Atlantic beaches. We're definitely going to have a much higher than normal tide tonight, just after midnight along the beaches as our onshore winds increase. Again, we're talking about deviations of about 4 to 6 feet above ground level at the beaches. And we may have another high tide right around noon tomorrow, timing that with the wind shifting around to the north and perhaps the northwest. We'll be close to that 4 to 6 foot range along the beaches as well early tomorrow afternoon. If you're along the intercoastal waterway, the highest water levels will be right around sunrise. That's when the high tide will be in the intercoastal waterway, and that's also when we'll have a very strong north wind sustained at tropical storm force.
So when will we feel some relief from the storm?
Yeah, I think by the time we get to tomorrow evening, our winds will shift to the northwest. They'll be gusty, and we'll get some drier air here on the what will then be the southwest side of Dorian as it progresses up the Gulf Stream towards the Carolinas. So conditions will start to improve Wednesday night, and on Thursday, keep in mind this will be a very hot day. As we get that dry air mass and a lot of sunshine, we'll have highs well up into the 90s.
On Thursday?
On Thursday.
Okay. And so if you had to pick between what would be worse, the wind or the surge, the storm surge, you would say? The
surge, yeah. This is going to be a large waves and surge event for the most part. We are going to have periodic sustained tropical storm force winds, especially late tonight through the morning hours tomorrow and perhaps into the early part of that tomorrow afternoon. We could have gusts in the 60 to 70 mile per hour range within one of these heavy rain bands tomorrow morning along the coast at the peak of this. But for the most part, with the power, that will cause some power outages. But the waves and the storm surge are probably going to have the biggest impact, especially on our coastal infrastructure.
And is it possible at this time that the hurricane could strengthen again and come closer to land? Is that still a possibility?
I think it's possible. Again, this is a Category 2 hurricane right now, right on the verge of a Category 3. It's 110 miles per hour sustained winds. Wouldn't have to go up much at all. Just one more mile per hour, and we'll be back to a Category 3. So that's certainly possible as it starts to feed upon the warm waters of the Gulf Stream. As far as it getting any closer, it's highly unlikely that we would see a direct landfall, but it is possible that this could get within about 50 miles or so of the coast as it parallels us tomorrow morning, and then by the early afternoon it'll be bypassing us. So it's possible we could get closer by, let's say, tens of miles, but the official forecast, again, 80 or 90 miles offshore, so that wouldn't be too much of a deviation, but it would be a big deal because our waves would be higher, and especially our storm surge values would be closer to that 6 foot above ground level prediction.
And is there a possibility of tornadoes that could happen from this?
If we're going to have tornadoes, they're going to be isolated. This isn't expected to be a large water spout or tornado outbreak, but we will have to watch within these bands for rotation that are coming on shore right now. This is kind of these outer bands are sometimes where we get the most number of tornadoes. We did have a warning earlier today as one of these bands came on shore down by Cape Canaveral and points south in Brevard County. So there has been enough rotation from time to time spotted on our Doppler radar to prompt tornado warnings to our south. So this does remain possible overnight, but we're not expecting a large tornado outbreak.
All right. And right now we are in a flood watch or warning?
We are in a flood watch. That's a great question. This is about the only thing that's really changed since the last advisory. The National Weather Service in Jacksonville, where I work, has issued a flash flood watch for Flagler County, and that's in the event that one of these heavy rain bands becomes kind of stuck over our area, especially as our winds start to veer around to the north tomorrow. We could get a band of heavy rain on the west side of Dorian's Eye, set up right over the county, and that would dump very heavy rainfall. We're more concerned about the heavy rainfall rates versus the overall rainfall totals that we'll receive from this, because if we drop 2 to 3 inches of rain in an hour, that could cause some street flooding, particularly along the coastal areas, as that coincides perhaps with high tide.
And what about inland flooding, especially over in Flagler Beach? There's a lot of concern out there if they're going to get flooded again.
Yeah, from rainfall, again, that would probably be a situation tomorrow morning where we get a heavy rain band that coincides with high tide, and it's not allowed really to drain off as much. But we're not talking about the 10, 15 type inch totals that we perhaps were thinking earlier in the week when Dorian was forecast to go up the spine of the state. Now that it's remaining just offshore, we should have rainfall totals that are more manageable, perhaps in the 3 to 5, 4 to 6 inch range. But the problem will be is if that falls very quickly, and that's why that flash flood watch is in effect.
So the next 24 to 36 hours, someone wants to know about rain total.
Right, yeah, we're just probably looking in that 3 to 5 or 4 to 6 inch type total. If we get one of these heavy rain bands to set up for a few hours, we could have a localized total, up 8 or 10 inches along the coast. But the bigger concern is going to be the waves, all the run up that comes onto the beach from those waves, and then the storm surge comes tomorrow morning.
And folks, a lot of people have just joined us, and they have a question that you addressed in the beginning, but if you could address it again.
Sure.
A lot of concern and wondering, when is the worst of the storm going to be?
Yeah, we're expecting, I think, the worst of the storm in terms of the wind and rain will be right around sunrise, let's say 6, 7 a.m. tomorrow till about noon. That's when our winds will start to shift around to the due north as Dorian starts to parallel our coast, moving generally due north or north-northwest. But as far as the storm surge, that's going to kind of depend on whether you're on the intercoastal or along the coast, the Atlantic coast. The Atlantic beaches are going to have a high tide tonight just after midnight, where we could have a surge of about 4 to 5 feet above ground level. And then depending on how quickly Dorian is parallel with us, the high tide early tomorrow afternoon at the Atlantic beaches could be just as high, 4 to perhaps 6 feet above ground level. For the intercoastal waterway, that high tide is going to be right around sunrise, and that might coincide with some of our strongest winds and heaviest rain. So take all those factors into account. The worst of the storm in terms of water will probably be right around sunrise if you're just off the coast and along the intercoastal waterway.
And if you're further inland in Palm Coast, what type of conditions would you experience if you're not around the water or the beach?
It's mainly going to be these sustained tropical storm force winds that will begin later tonight and go through the early afternoon hours, and then the heavy rainfall. If you're in the rest of Palm Coast, if we get one of these heavy rain bands to set up and train, if that's the kind of the term, or linger over us for several hours with very heavy rainfall rates, that's the biggest hazard, I think, inland from the beach and not on the intercoastal.
Now, also, just remember, too, that we're also watching the possibility of flooding in Crescent Lake, Dead Lake, and places like that.
Right.
And so they also could potentially see some flooding concerns. Matter of fact, there's an inland flood warning for the inland rivers, Haw Creek, Dead Lake, those places there. That's why those areas are also under evacuation. And the Weather Service is concerned about some buildup about some of the water backing down St. John's River and possibly impacting some of those lakes. Because Crescent Lake, sometimes they call it Lake Crescent, Dead Lake, and all that, Haw Creek, are all interconnected to the St. John's River. So if that rises and backs up a little bit, plus if we get one of these rain bands that parks over some of those western areas of Flagler County, Daytona North, Andalusia, Lake Diston, and places like that, you could potentially have some flooding problems. And what was the verdict on how much water in the St. John's River?
Yeah. So the storm surge out there would probably be 1 to 2 feet above ground level in those spots, and that's mainly due, as Bob said, to the fact that the St. John's River is going to be backed up just by the wind flow around Dorian. We'll have a strong northerly wind, kind of similar to what we had in Matthew, at least weather-wise set up, but probably not as high water out there as they experienced in Matthew. But we will have an additional 1 to 2 feet, perhaps above ground level, especially for the folks who are on the south side of those bodies of water.
And we know that the storm has been moving very slow. What is it at now, and why is it moving so slow? Do you know?
Yes, it's been moving very slow for a couple of days now. What happened is the steering mechanism that brought it all the way to the Bahamas was this Bermuda high pressure system that we often see in the summer. That high pressure system and the clockwise flow around it weakened considerably. In fact, got out of the way, and there's really nothing to steer Dorian until we finally had a little frontal boundary, or what we call a trough of low pressure, move from the Midwest into the mid-Atlantic states. That's what pushed the Bermuda high out, and that is basically why this storm has gone stationary. There's not a lot to steer it right now, but we are looking upstream, up in the Great Lakes and extending down to the Ohio and Tennessee valleys. That's another frontal system or trough of low pressure. That is what's going to steer this north and then northeastward as it kind of parallels the southeast U.S. coast and perhaps becomes dangerously close to the Outer Banks later this week.
I just got an update on the progress of Dorian as well right now. I got a slide where you can see me. Hello. Right now, as of 9 o'clock, the Hurricane Center put out a special, just an update, and the center of Dorian was 105 miles off the coast of Melbourne, Florida, and they've already had a sustained wind of 40 miles an hour at Indian River Beach with a gust to looks like 51 miles per hour. So those winds are on their way up the coast and coming this direction. So the stronger winds will start at the beaches and then progress inland, but overall, as you get further from the coast, the winds will be a little bit less. So the very strongest winds will be right along the immediate beaches, but even on the western side of the county, some of those agricultural areas where there's big, wide fields, you're going to see stronger winds there as well because you don't have as many trees and things like that kind of blocking the wind a little bit. But again, the strongest winds will be immediate beaches, along the waterways, things like that. And look at the radar again. So folks, we want to encourage everyone to really don't be traveling tonight. This squall is about to come in and will probably bring some really gusty winds, and then the rain shield of Dorian is going to be slowly overspreading Flagler County here within the next few hours. So it's really We don't recommend travel or any of that. If you can help it, best to stay inside and let the storm come through, because some of those rain bands can produce some sudden gust of wind that could potentially take trees and power lines down. So this is the time to really, the strongest winds are going to be coming in later on tonight, but things are already going to be getting kind of nasty out there for driving in and all this rain and everything. Once it sets in, it's pretty much going to be with us for the duration of the event.
And those winds were what speeds again?
We had a sustained wind down at Indian River, which I believe in Brevard County, not Indian River County, but there was a sustained winds of 40 miles an hour, which is just above tropical storm force, that being 39, but they had a gust of 51, and that was at a weather station down to our south. And we did get a few reports of 40 miles an hour. What was it, 40, 46 was it? Out of Daytona Beach.
Yep.
Yeah, with some of the with this rain band coming in. Now we have weather spotters all over Flagler County, so we will be getting reports, and we'll be passing them on as well as we get them to the Weather Service and sharing some of them with you as well as Dorian begins to impact Flagler County. We've not had any reports of tropical storm force winds yet in Flagler County. We have a weather station on the Hammock Dunes Bridge, and it was gusting to 35 miles per hour a little while ago, that's not quite tropical storm force. Again, it's got to be 39 or greater than that. So we are starting to get into the effects of Dorian, and again, I really don't recommend traveling if you don't really need to be traveling. A lot of places are closed anyways, and some of these squalls can be blinding, especially at night. If we get a really heavy rain squall, causes ponding or flooding of a road. It's really hard to see that at night. So if you really don't need to be out there, please don't be driving around in this.
And Ben, what about Dorian? How far out is the storm from us? How many miles? And can you explain the wind?
Right. Yeah, Dorian's about 160 miles to the southeast of Flagler Beach right now. It's bypassing Cape Canaveral and Melbourne, as Bob just said, about 100 miles offshore of there. So again, the thing about that change today with Dorian is the storm grew in size as far as its wind field. As the storm has weakened, it's expanded. So the tropical storm force winds are now extending out more than 150 miles. It's out to 160 miles from the eye of this. So again, we're about 160 miles away from the eye. So the tropical storm force winds will be spreading on shore here within the next few hours, probably a little bit after midnight. The hurricane force winds are out to about 45 miles from the eye. So we do expect those to stay offshore. But again, any slight deviation in the eye closer to us to the west would perhaps bring a higher potential for a sustained hurricane force gust. Hurricane force winds begin at 74 miles per hour. We could get those sort of gusts early tomorrow morning as the heaviest of the rain bands that's closest to the eye works towards us from the east.
So lots of effects on us, even though we're out of the cone. Are we officially out of the cone? But
well, again, remember that the cone is the forecast just for the eye of the storm. And historically, looking back over all the forecasts, even 1/3 of the time, the eye travels outside of that cone. And we know with this expanded wind field that really tracking the eye at this point doesn't really tell the whole story. The storm is expanded. It has a larger wind field than it did here the past couple of days. So we're going to feel the effects here on the left side of the circulation, which is historically the weaker side. But there's still going to be tropical storm force sustained. Still going to be, as Bob said, hazardous to get out and travel in. We're going to have a lot of heavy rainfall, and we could have some very heavy rain bands set up right at the time of high tide tomorrow morning, and that's why we have the flash flood watch out through tomorrow.
Great. All right, Bob, do you have any closing?
Now, we'll be here at the Emergency Operations Center all night long, watching Dorian, watching the reports and everything. We have a great team of staff here. We get some volunteers, both out there helping us track the storm, helping us in the Emergency Operations Center. Big shout out to them. They're going to be up here all night long with us, and there's a lot of things we couldn't do without our volunteers. So I will say a big shout out to them, helping with a lot of things. We're going to be here all night and keeping you informed on what's going on with Dorian.
Great, thank you.